For decades, Rob Reiner was seen as one of Hollywood's most recognizable creative forces. To audiences, he was the sharp-witted actor turned brilliant director, the man behind beloved films that define generations. His public image felt open, confident, and authentic, someone who seemed to live his life in plain sight. But beneath that familiar exterior, Rob Reiner was quietly balancing two very different realities. And almost no one noticed. While the world focused on his success, his humor, and his outspoken personality, there was another side of his life unfolding far from cameras and interviews. Friends sensed contradictions they couldn't fully explain. Colleagues noticed shifts in behavior that didn't match the confident persona audiences knew. Yet because Rob appeared so self-assured, few questioned what might be happening beneath the surface. For nearly 30 years, Reiner managed to keep these two lives carefully separated. One was public, polished, and widely celebrated. The other was private, emotionally complex, and shaped by pressures that rarely made headlines. It wasn't about scandal or attention, it was about navigating expectations, legacy, and personal conflict in an industry that rewards performance far more than honesty. Only now, with time and reflection, are the deeper layers of Rob Reiner's life coming into focus. Long overlooked interviews, shifting relationships, and subtle patterns reveal that the man audiences thought they fully understood was carrying far more than he ever let on. What seemed like confidence was sometimes control. What looked like transparency often masked restraint. This story isn't about tearing down a legacy, it's about understanding the cost of maintaining one. As the hidden pieces finally surface, they reveal a side of Rob Reiner that challenges the image audiences believed for decades and exposes a truth that remained buried far longer than anyone ever realized. Rob Reiner's public life has always felt unusually transparent. From his early days in television to his rise as a celebrated filmmaker, he appeared comfortable speaking his mind and embracing visibility. Audiences believed they knew him, not just his work, but his personality, values, and convictions. That sense of familiarity made it easy to assume there was nothing left to uncover. Yet familiarity can be deceptive, especially when it is built on carefully maintained consistency. Behind the scenes, Rob Reiner was navigating a far more complicated internal world than his public confidence suggested. Growing up as the son of a legendary entertainer meant expectations were present from the very beginning. Success was not simply encouraged, it was assumed. From a young age, Reiner learned how to perform, how to read a room, and how to meet expectations before they were spoken. These skills served him well professionally, but they also shaped how he managed his inner life. As his career progressed, Reiner became known not just for his creative talent, but for his certainty. He spoke decisively, led confidently, and rarely appeared conflicted in public. Privately, however, that certainty often masked ongoing internal tension. People close to him later described a man who thought deeply, sometimes excessively, about responsibility, legacy, and identity. He carried the weight of being both an individual and a symbol of success, of belief, of continuity. This is where the idea of a double life begins to emerge. Not in the sense of secrecy or deception, but in emotional separation. One version of Rob Reiner existed outwardly assured, outspoken, and firmly rooted in his public stance. The other existed inwardly, shaped by doubt, pressure, and the constant need to reconcile personal feelings with public expectations. These two realities rarely overlapped. Reiner's work itself often reflected this divide. His films explored themes of morality, power, loyalty, and human contradiction, ideas that suggest a man deeply engaged with complexity. While audiences viewed these stories as reflections of his confidence and clarity, they were also expressions of questions he rarely voiced directly. Creativity became a space where ambiguity was allowed. Even if his personal life required certainty, relationships too were affected by this internal balancing act. Reiner valued connection and collaboration, but he also maintained firm boundaries. Those closest to him noticed that while he was warm and engaged, he was also selective about vulnerability. Conversations could be lively and open, yet certain subjects remained untouched. This wasn't distance, it was control. Learned over decades of navigating public life. As the years passed, maintaining this separation required increasing effort. Public engagement demanded consistency, while private life demanded reflection and restraint. Reiner understood that once an image is established, changing it can feel risky. Expectations solidify and deviation invites scrutiny. So instead of redefining himself publicly, he adapted internally, carrying unresolved tensions quietly while presenting stability outwardly. What made this double life largely invisible was how functional it appeared. There were no dramatic breaks, no sudden disappearances, no obvious contradictions. Everything seemed to work. And because it worked, no one questioned the cost. But over time, even well-managed duality can become exhausting. Looking back now, subtle signs become easier to recognize. Shifts in tone, changes in focus, moments of withdrawal that once seemed insignificant take on new meaning. They suggest not crisis, but accumulation, the slow buildup of emotional labor required to sustain two versions of oneself for decades. Rob Reiner did not set out to live a divided life. It was something that developed gradually, shaped by upbringing, success, and the unspoken rules of visibility. One life was lived in public, affirmed and understood by millions. The other was lived privately, shaped by reflection, pressure, and restraint, only now with time and distance. Does the full shape of that divide begin to come into focus, not as a flaw, but as a human response to a life lived under constant expectation? As Rob Reiner moved further into midlife, the gap between his outward certainty and his inner complexity widened. Publicly, he remained a steady presence, confident in interviews, decisive in his work, and unafraid to express strong opinions. Privately, however, he was wrestling with the long-term effects of carrying responsibility for so many years. Success had given him freedom, but it had also locked him into an identity that felt increasingly rigid. Those close to Reiner noticed that while he remained engaged and intellectually sharp, he was also becoming more guarded about his personal reflections. He was thoughtful but selective, open yet controlled. It was as though he had learned to reveal just enough to maintain connection, while keeping the deeper questions carefully contained. This balance allowed him to function smoothly, but it also limited how fully he could be understood. Part of this internal tension came from legacy. Being associated with influential work and a well-known family history meant that Reiner was constantly measured against expectations that predated his own choices. Every success reinforced those expectations, while any sign of uncertainty felt magnified. Over time, he began to internalize the idea that doubt was something to be managed privately, not shared publicly. His professional life continued to thrive, but the emotional cost of consistency began to surface in subtle ways. He became increasingly deliberate about where he invested his energy. Projects were chosen not only for creative reasons, but for how well they aligned with the version of himself the public already recognized. Reinvention felt risky, even when personal growth demanded it. Relationships reflected this careful approach. Reiner valued loyalty and long-term connection, but he also maintained emotional boundaries that rarely shifted. Friends describe him as present and supportive, yet difficult to read when it came to his deeper concerns. Conversations stayed thoughtful and engaging, but rarely crossed into territory that might challenge the stability he had worked so hard to maintain. This pattern extended into how he handled stress. Rather than confronting uncertainty head-on, Reiner tended to intellectualize it. He analyzed situations, considered implications, and adjusted behavior accordingly. This approach was effective, but it also kept emotional discomfort at a distance. Over time, that distance became a defining feature of his private life. What made this double existence sustainable for so long was how normalized it became. There was no dramatic turning point, no single moment when the divide formed. It grew gradually, reinforced by routine and success. The public saw a man who appeared consistent and assured. The private reality was one of constant self-regulation, where reflection replaced expression and restraint replaced release. As years passed, moments of quiet fatigue began to appear. Not exhaustion in the physical sense, but a weariness that comes from sustained emotional management. Reiner continued to show up, continued to lead, and continued to speak with conviction. Yet beneath that surface was a growing awareness that carrying two versions of oneself indefinitely requires sacrifice. Only with time has it become clear that this was never about secrecy. It was about survival within a system that rewards clarity and discourages complexity. Rob Reiner learned how to live within that system exceptionally well, even if it meant keeping parts of himself out of view. Now, looking back, the pieces align more clearly. The careful wording, the consistent posture, the moments of withdrawal that once went unnoticed, all point to a life lived with intention, but also with constraint. One version of Rob Reiner belonged to the world. Confidence people admired was something he had learned to project early, and over the years it became second nature. Yet maintaining that steadiness required constant adjustment. He measured his words carefully, weighed how statements might be interpreted, and understood that once an image is established, it often becomes a role others expect you to keep playing. Those closest to him sensed that beneath his assured demeanor was a man who thought deeply about consequence. Reiner was not impulsive in his private life. He reflected, reconsidered, and often delayed decisions longer than people realized. While this made him appear calm and controlled, it also meant that unresolved thoughts accumulated quietly. He rarely allowed himself the relief of emotional release, preferring to stay composed rather than risk vulnerability. The longer this pattern continued, the more ingrained it became. Emotional discipline turned into habit and habit into identity. Reiner learned to separate how he felt from how he functioned. He could experience doubt, frustration, or fatigue internally while continuing to operate externally with precision. To most observers, nothing appeared amiss. In reality, he was constantly managing an internal dialogue few ever heard. This divide became especially evident during periods of change. Shifts in the industry, evolving public conversations, and the passage of time forced reflection. Reiner adapted outwardly, but inwardly each change prompted deeper questions about purpose and direction. He remained productive and visible, yet increasingly selective about engagement. Public presence became something he controlled, not something that defined him. Relationships during this period reflected that same careful balance. He valued connection, but only on terms that felt stable. Emotional depth existed, but it was measured. Reiner was supportive and present, yet rarely placed himself in positions where he might feel exposed. Those around him often sensed there was more beneath the surface, but without clear access. They respected the boundaries he maintained. What made this double life so enduring was its effectiveness. There were no crises forcing confrontation, no visible breakdowns demanding change. Everything functioned. And when a system works, it rarely invites scrutiny. Reiner continued to contribute creatively, remained intellectually engaged, and fulfilled the expectations attached to his name. The internal cost, however, remained largely invisible. Over time, that cost took the form of quiet fatigue. Not exhaustion from work, but weariness from consistency. Carrying a public self that never wavered required ongoing effort. Every appearance, conversation, and decision reinforced a version of himself that left little room for contradiction. Growth happened internally, but expression remained limited. Looking back now, subtle moments take on new significance. Pauses that once seemed thoughtful now appear deliberate. Shifts in tone that went unnoticed suggest careful recalibration. None of it points to turmoil, but it does point to restraint, a life lived with intention. But also with containment. Rob Reiner's story challenges the assumption that visibility equals openness. Being seen does not always mean being known. For decades, he navigated public life with skill and discipline, offering clarity where complexity might have raised questions. It was not deception. It was adaptation. Only with time does the fuller picture come into focus. The confident public figure and the reflective private individual were not in conflict, but they were rarely aligned. One existed to meet expectation. The other existed to process reality. Understanding this does not diminish Rob Reiner's legacy, it humanizes it. It reveals the emotional labor behind consistency and the personal negotiation required to sustain a long public life. His double existence was not about hiding who he was, but about protecting the space where he could continue to be himself. And as the final pieces of this story come together, what remains is not a revelation of scandal, but an acknowledgement of complexity. A recognition that even those who appear most certain are often carrying far more than they ever revealed. As Rob Reiner entered the later stages of his career, the pattern of living between two realities continued to define his life. Publicly, he remained articulate, witty, and decisive qualities that endeared him to colleagues, audiences, and critics alike. Privately, however, he carried the weight of decades spent balancing expectation, identity, and emotional labor. The discipline that had served him so well now existed alongside a growing awareness of what had been sacrificed to maintain it. Those closest to him noticed a subtle shift in demeanor over the years. While he continued to engage fully in his work, there were moments of quiet reflection, a measured patience, and an intentionality in conversation that suggested careful self-management. Reiner understood that consistency was essential to sustaining the image the world expected. Yet he also realized that consistency required continuous effort. Emotional energy had to be rationed, vulnerabilities managed, and private thoughts filtered through the lens of public perception. This duality affected relationships in nuanced ways. Reiner valued closeness and trust, but he approached it cautiously. Emotional exposure was calculated, shared selectively, and always measured against potential consequences. Friends observed his generosity and warmth, yet also recognized the boundaries he maintained. That careful balance allowed him to maintain deep connections while safeguarding the inner life that few were permitted to. See, Reiner's approach to career decisions reflected the same blend of calculation and introspection. Projects were selected not only for artistic merit, but for how they reinforced the persona he had cultivated. Public consistency was prioritized alongside creative exploration. Success required both vision and restraint. And Reiner understood that what the world admired was often the result of careful internal negotiation. Even moments of personal doubt or fatigue were handled privately, never allowed to disrupt the polished image presented externally. Over time, this required a form of emotional endurance that few outside his inner circle could appreciate. While audiences saw confidence, focus, and clarity, the private reality involved constant self-assessment, quiet vigilance, and careful compartmentalization. Only in hindsight does the full picture emerge. The outwardly confident filmmaker, actor, and public personality was always paired with a reflective, private individual managing the complexities of life under scrutiny. The separation between these two selves was not accidental. It was a strategy honed over decades to navigate expectation, maintain control, and preserve personal equilibrium. This dual existence, while largely invisible, underscores a broader truth about human experience, particularly for those in the public eye. Visibility does not equate to complete understanding, and apparent certainty often masks deep reflection. For Rob Reiner, the work of sustaining a double life was not about deception. It was about survival, balance, and maintaining the ability to function both personally and professionally at a high level for decades. The revelation of this carefully managed private world does not diminish Reiner's achievements. If anything, it adds depth to them. It reminds us that even those who appear most certain are often negotiating unseen complexities. His story illuminates the emotional labor behind a successful public life, the quiet negotiation required to meet expectations, and the personal cost of maintaining alignment between external perception and internal reality. In the end, what emerges is a portrait of resilience, adaptability, and thoughtful introspection. Rob Reiner lived a life both in view and out of view, balancing ambition, legacy, and personal reflection with remarkable skill. The story of his double life is not a tale of scandal or intrigue. It is a testament to the human capacity to navigate complexity, protect oneself, and thrive despite the pressures of constant visibility. And now, for the first time, the world can appreciate the full scope of the life he quietly, carefully, and masterfully maintained.